Hi guys, Matt here, welcome to Ranger Reviews, and today I'm going to be looking at Season 2 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. As always, everything that is said in this video is my thoughts on the season, but I would also love to know what you guys think, so please do get those thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you do enjoy this video, please do hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. But with all that cliched YouTuber stuff out the way, let's get into the review. So the season begins with the Rangers competing in a charity dirt bike race, because of course they are. What else would you be doing in high school, you know? And on the moon, Rita sees that they're out in the open and says that this is the perfect time to attack. But before she can send down a monster, she is interrupted by the arrival of a new villain called Lord Zedd. Now, Lord Zedd is Rita's boss, and he announces that because Rita has failed to complete the mission that was assigned to her, namely conquering the Earth, he will now take charge. The first time that you see this guy, you just instantly know that he is going to be a bigger threat than Rita was, because not only does he look badass, but he's got this kind of low gravelly voice going for him that just sounds really menacing, and you know that, you know, this guy is going to really be a threat to the Rangers. Oh, and just for good measure, he has a snake that transformed into a staff, which is of course awesome. Now, I know that at the time there were a lot of complaints from parents that Zedd was too scary, but he's an Empress of Evil, so I don't really know what they expected, to be honest. But there you go. Another interesting point is that Zedd is actually an American exclusive villain. I think it's always pretty cool when they do stuff like that, you know, on their own, rather than just solely relying on the Sentai footage. Now, once Zedd has landed on the moon, he berates Rita for her failures, saying that she's not fit to destroy a cockroach because she was beaten by a bunch of children. And you have to admit the guy has a point. So because of this, he strips her of her powers and sends her to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, in his own words. Zordon, in the command center, detects Zedd's arrival and contacts the Rangers, informing them of their latest threat. Zedd then sends down his own army of putties, which are harder to defeat than Rita's originals, but they do also have a pretty cool feature where they have a large Z emblazoned on them. Probably a bit of vanity on Zedd's part, but hey. So after the Rangers battle them for a while, and by their own admission have a lot more trouble with them than they have before, it's Jason that eventually works out that they can be defeated by aiming directly for that Z on the chest. So yeah, it is a bit of a vanity of Zedd's, and that also turns out to be their downfall, and he probably didn't think that they were going to work that out quite as quickly as they did. There's two really significant things that happen here. First of all, while the Rangers are fighting Zedd's putties, we see the first instance of Tommy's powers begin to fail. It was something that was hinted at as a possibility in season 1, but we didn't really see it start to happen until the start of this season. And after they have eventually seen off the putties and they go back into the command center, we see them without the helmets on but still in the suits, which again is something that we hadn't seen before, and I just thought was a really cool touch, to be honest. Here we also see Zedd's style of monster making is a bit different. Rita tended to, you know, chant spells and things like that in order to create monsters, you know, Green Ranger aside, but Zedd tends to transform objects or living things into monsters, and on this occasion he creates a monster called Piranha's Head from an actual piranha. and Parentis Head freezes most of the Zords. Yeah, I said this guy was a much bigger threat, and in the very first occasion that one of his monsters does battle with the Rangers, he does manage to freeze 4 of the Zords. So that ends part 1, and we start off part 2 with Zedd turning the Tyrannosaurus against the Rangers, which is pretty hardcore. And then, just for funsies, he decides to turn the Dragon Zord against them as well. Naturally, this forces the Rangers to retreat. Zordon says that they will need new Zords, the Thunder Zords, equipped with the power of thunder, which is a bit strange, but hey, it's Power Rangers, we'll go with it. They do say at this point that they cannot be sure whether or not Tommy's powers will last long enough in order for him to support a new Zord. They later reveal that unfortunately that will not be the case. Eventually, Billy and Trini manage to create a device that frees the original Zords from Zedd's control, but he does not take this well, and he then strips them of their powers and sends them to the depths, so they are now beyond repair, basically. But fortunately, Alpha manages to salvage enough of them in order to create the Thunder Zords, and eventually the Rangers, in the new Megazord, defeat the monster. Much like with the original Megazord, most of the individual Zords don't really do much, but the Megazord itself does look pretty cool. Again, it's got a kind of simplistic feel to it, and it just looks really nice. And the other thing that's worth discussing with the 3-part season opener as it is that we start to see some development for Bulk and Skull. They are originally attacked by the Pussies, but after the Rangers rescue them and fight off the Pussies themselves, they decide to find out who the Rangers really are. And there are a number of occasions where they actually come pretty close to discovering the truth. And if they hadn't have decided to give up by the start of next season, then you have to think that they probably would have done, because the only reasons they didn't were either because the Rangers screwed them over on multiple occasions, or the one time they actually did, they unfortunately got their memories erased by a monster. But you do also see a pretty nice Bulk and Skull moment in the episode when he's a Ranger, not a Ranger. They're on a stakeout to find the Rangers' true identities, and amazingly they actually do manage to do it. But the Rangers' memories have all got erased. So for the first time ever, Bulk and Skull take on a monster. And unfortunately they do get their memories erased, so they forget who the Rangers are. But it just goes to show that, for all their goofiness, they probably would have got there in the end if they had decided to keep going. Now, in Linkara's review, if you've seen his History of Power Rangers series, which I would definitely recommend, he describes this season, particularly the early parts of it, as the Tommy Oliver show featuring the Power Rangers. And as amusing a line as that is, I can definitely see his point from the Mutiny, which is the opener. And a lot of the early episodes tend to focus on Tommy and Zedd's desire to strip him of his powers for good. Now, this does make sense from a narrative standpoint, because we know that this is happening, we know that it's going to happen at some point, and there are 2 good reasons, really, for Zedd wanting to strip Tommy of his powers. First of all, he says himself, the Green Ranger was created by Rita, and he wants to wipe out the memory of her failures. And of course, the fact Tommy's powers are in short supply does give the team a definite weakness that he can exploit. So it does make sense from that point of view, but it does unfortunately come at the detriment of the rest of the Rangers. And just to illustrate that point, really, the next significant plot development comes in a three-parter called Green No More. Tommy sees a vision of himself in the future where he's in the middle of a battle, but he's not wearing his Green Ranger costume. He's had some tests being run on him by Alpha, which reveal that unfortunately their last attempt to restore his powers has failed, so he's probably only got one more fight in him. At the same time, we get this new group of jackass teenagers starting Angel Grove, and even Bolt and Skull are scared of them. Now, Zedd sees this and hits upon an idea to recruit these new teenagers to be his Dark Rangers, basically an evil version of the Power Rangers. This is slightly different again to Rita's plan, because she used putties that were just given sort of pseudo-morphing devices, whereas he is taking the teenagers with attitude concept and just kind of flipping that on its head. So this is another example where you can see that Zedd is clearly a bit higher up in the food chain when it comes to the evil side of things, and his plans are a bit smarter, to be honest. And he also reveals that he's got this green crystal, which once the last of Tommy's powers are fully drained, he will use that to power the Dark Rangers. And he also unleashes his latest monster, Turban Shell. So quite a lot going on in this three-parter. Zedd transports the Rangers, minus Tommy, to another dimension which he calls the other world. He taunts them a bit with the fact that he sealed off the command centre, and also unveils the Dark Rangers. Now, with a name like the Dark Rangers, you would think, these guys are going to be almost as much of a threat as Zedd himself, or at least, a group of people that, are a real, genuine threat to the Rangers. But frankly, when you see them in their Dark Ranger costumes, they're about as threatening as my dog. And he couldn't be any less threatening if he tried, quite frankly. So, as a concept, it is a good one, but the costumes just look so ridiculous. So it does fall a bit flat there. Even though Tommy is powerless, because he has been transported to another dimension and Turban Shell has permanently stripped him of the last of his powers. He doesn't give up. He still fights the monster, although he does try and run away from him at one point. Not entirely surprisingly, but he does fight him off eventually, and then Goldar comes along and taunts Tommy a little bit with a video of his time as a Ranger, designed to basically break Tommy's spirit so that he surrenders to Goldar. But this doesn't work, it just gives Tommy a resolve to fight on. While this is all going on, Zedd has sent the others back to Angel Grove, knowing that they can basically do nothing to stop him, and they go back to Billy's lab where they attempt to break through the force field that is still around the command centre and is constricting it. So eventually Tommy does manage to defeat Goldar and, using a time device, frees himself from the dimension. The other Rangers are all obviously relieved to see him, and they do establish contact with Zordon, who reveals that a non-Power Ranger has to go into Zedd's dimension and shatter the crystal in order to free the Dark Rangers. Tommy says, that's me. He goes into the dimension, shatters the crystal, frees the Dark Rangers from the silly costumes and gives himself enough power for one last fight. And that is genuinely the last time we see Tommy as the Green Ranger. As I say, the Dark Ranger subplot didn't really come off. It probably didn't help that it was only really in that three-parter, but it was just a bit of an anticlimax, to be honest. But the following episode is called Missing Green, and it's got some really good follow-up from the previous season. We see Jason's training for a karate competition, because that seems to be all that goes on in Angel Grove, other than cleanups. But he's struggling to focus because he explains to Zach that he's feeling guilty about not getting the green candle back in season 1, and he blames himself for Tommy losing his powers. Eventually he does manage to, overcome that. But yeah, it's just a really nice bit of follow-up. And then a few episodes later is another two-parter called White Light. Kimberly gets a letter from Tommy where he says that he's going to be coming home. He's basically gone away to a cabin owned by his uncle since losing the Green Ranger powers. But he's coming home. Trini suggests that they throw a surprise party, which obviously everyone's up for. At the command center, we see Zordon Alpha go into a hidden chamber for a little secret mission, which they don't actually tell the Rangers about. We also see Bulk and Skull on another stakeout. Again, as usual, attempting to discover the identities of the Rangers. They see something crashing to Earth, so they decide to investigate, see what it is, and they come across a very familiar looking space dumpster. I think you know where this is going. So Skull suggests they take it back to his dad's workshop and attempt to open it. Zach's retrieving a football. He notices something a bit strange with this statue that Zedd is in the process of turning into his latest monster. He attempts to contact the command center but doesn't get anywhere. Zedd sends the putties down to fight the Rangers because the monster's not quite ready yet. After that, they all go to the command center and discover that everything except the emergency power has been shut off. Billy notices this disc that he's decided to take back to his lab to examine, to try and get some answers as to what's going on. When he examines the disc, he finds that there's a hidden door of light in the command center, so he decides to go back there to investigate a bit further, and he discovers the secret chamber that Zordon and Alpha were going into and finds that they are building a new Ranger. He goes back to his lab and explains to the others what he saw about this new Ranger. Initially, they're not entirely happy, but Jason basically tells them to, I believe his exact words were, get a grip. They have to trust Zordon and Alpha, and Billy quite rightly points out that they do need a new Ranger because Zedd's monsters are more powerful, and more powerful monsters and a smaller team isn't really a good mix. So once Zordon and Alpha are finished, they summon the Rangers and they reveal a new White Ranger. And of course, as you would probably expect, it is revealed to be Tommy. There were a couple of new characters that were introduced. One called Richie and another called Curtis, who's also Zach's cousin. They were basically brought in to be potential red herrings so that it wasn't too obvious. But I think we all knew that it was going to be Tommy simply because of how popular the character is. It would have been self-defeating not to keep him on the show. So Zordon reveals that Tommy's the new leader of the Power Rangers. I'll get some more thoughts on that later. And he also gives him a white saber called Saba that talks, which is of course pretty cool. So the Rangers managed to defeat the Scarlet Sentinel, and Bulk and Skull have managed to eventually open up the dumpster. But of course, being Bulk and Skull, they have fallen asleep. So the Rangers return Rita to her dumpster and send her back into space again. So the next multi-boss is called the Ninja Encounter, and we're introduced to 3 new teenagers called Rocky, Adam, and Aisha, who are competing in a ninja competition. And they're also from the neighbouring town called Stone Canyon, a place that we never actually see but is mentioned a fair few times. And there is also a chase scene involving a baby stroller that takes up about a quarter of the first episode. I'm not trolling, I'm deadly serious. This really did happen. Yeah, what can I say? 90s. So eventually this ridiculousness happens, although it does again show Bulk and Skull in a good light, because they see what's happening, and despite Skull joking about the baby taking itself for a walk, they do step in and try and help. So the new teams win the ninja competition, and Zedd kidnaps them to try and turn them into his evil ninjas. So despite his failure with the Dark Rangers earlier on in the season, he has decided to pursue this concept, which is understandable because it's a logical thing to try and do, to try and fight like with like almost. So Zedd sends down a new monster called the Terror Blossom, as well as reviving a previous monster called the Hatchosaurus, which distracts the Rangers from their attempts to rescue the new teams. To be honest, this 3-parter has its good moments, but it's kind of all over the place, because we see the Rangers have to keep going backwards and forwards from one place to another, and it just all gets a bit messy, in all honesty. Obviously, eventually it all resolves itself. The Rangers fight off the monster, rescue Rocky, Adam, and Aisha. But one thing that does happen is that Tommy, Billy, and Kimberly are forced to reveal their identities, which it was established way back now in Day of the Dumpster that they're not supposed to do. That is one of the rules that they have to follow. But because Billy had been fighting off a snake, the only way that Tommy and Kimberly could help him was to take his helmet off. So another thing that we'd seen over the previous few episodes was mention of this World Team Peace Summit that's taking place in Switzerland. And we see it, the Rangers discuss the possibility of what would happen if one of them was chosen. So of course, naturally, 3 of them are. The 3 that are chosen are Jason, Zach, and Trini. It's also worth noting that while we have had the discussion of this summit, we've also seen a few episodes where those 3 Rangers weren't in it too much. There was a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on, which eventually led to them leaving because of a pay dispute. But on screen, it meant that while they're in the suits, it's not the original actors that are doing the voices. They're actually dubbers, and really bad ones at that, that don't really sound anything like the originals. So Zordon explains that because of the amounts of power that are required, they have to travel to a deserted planet to retrieve a sword. Zedd obviously wants to stop them because the Rangers being at half strength would make it significantly easier for him to defeat them. And it's at this point that he unveils his own Zord called Serpentera, which is basically this really long, massive snake-looking thing, and it's just awesome, frankly. The Rangers find the statue containing the sword, and eventually they manage to retrieve it, although it does take all of them to do it. Zedd, being Zedd and not wanting to do things by halves, decides to wipe out the entire planet, but the Rangers do manage to escape. We also discover that, as awesome looking as it is, Serpentera does have an Achilles heel. That is basically that it has about as much energy as I do first thing in the morning before I've had caffeine. So it is a bit of a problem. Once the Rangers return with the sword, Zordon reveals that he's chosen Rocky, Adam and Aisha to be the new Rangers, and the powers are transferred. Most of the rest of the season is just multi-parters of varying degrees of relevance and quality, but there are a couple that I wanted to talk about. The first one that's really relevant is called The Wedding. So Zedd goes into a deep sleep to recharge his evil energies, and unfortunately for him, it coincides with the Rangers going to Australia on vacation and to film a movie. While all this is going on, Rita returns again. Now, Zedd and the Rangers have both sent her into space at this point, and both times she's come back, so they clearly weren't doing a very good job of sending her away if she's had two comebacks within the same season. So after she gets Vince to grow her full size again, she gets him to get to work on a love potion so that when Zedd wakes up, he'll fall in love with her. It works and they get married, much to Goldar's dismay. And at the same time, Finster, who has been at best on the sidelines for kind of the entire season up to this point, gets something else to do. He gives Alpha an evil reprogramming, which makes him shut off Zordon and teleport the Rangers to an abandoned theatre where they can't teleport out and they can't use their weapons either, so they kind of have to use their heads to escape. At one point they do actually escape. Alpha just heads to the back. I have to say that evil Alpha was just hilarious. You know, you just know that they were having so much fun with it, with this bit, and yeah, it was just a great laugh. It was, as a season, probably a bit darker than season one, so it was kind of good to see a bit of the goofiness that we know and love Power Rangers for. I know that Zedd and Rita's marriage has been criticised by some, but to be honest, I actually thought they were much better together, and I'll get into my reasons why I think that a bit more in my next video when I review season 3. So that is basically an plot of The Wedding, and then we have Return of the Green Ranger, which doesn't really do anything to advance the plot, but it does contain a fight that really had to happen at some point, which is the Green Ranger versus the White Ranger. So yeah, basically Rita gets this wizard to create an evil clone of Tommy to revive the Green Ranger and get him to fight the real Tommy while the other Rangers have been sent 200 years into the past. Again, the only really relevant thing here is the Green Ranger versus the White Ranger. I just wanted to mention that, really. The season finale is an episode called Blue Ranger Gone Bad, and it's basically a filler episode, and much like an oyster stew with season 1, it's a bit of an anticlimax, but even there, we did see a kind of wrap up of the whole Zach Angela subplot as he finally got to take her on a date. But with this, it just seems like it could have been based anywhere in the season. And, you know, I think Return of the Green Ranger would have probably been the best finale to the season, in all honesty. It was just a shame that after The Wedding, there wasn't really much else going on. Now, it's fair to say that season 2 did have its problems off screen. As I mentioned earlier, Austin St. John, Walter Jones, and Zoe Trang all left the show kind of midway through because of a pay dispute. With all that going on off screen, it definitely had an effect on what we saw on screen, such as the bad dubbing that I talked about earlier. In terms of the new Rangers, they're all likeable enough, but in all honesty, judging them purely on season 2, they didn't really do much other than simply fulfill the roles of the Rangers that they replaced. Now, they did all get a focus episode each when they first joined the team, but even then they didn't always do them too many favours. Adams was a really good one, all about him having to overcome his self-confidence. Rocky's one was about him being placed under a spell to become obsessive with Pachinko machine and just want to have fun rather than help the Rangers in a fight. And Aisha basically went a bit power crazy as fire safety captain. So not really the best introduction to 2 of the 3, but like I said, they were all likeable enough characters, and they do improve come season 3. I think Rocky's biggest problem for me is the fact that he was one of only 2 Red Rangers in the show's entire history not to be the team leader, and the other one is almost universally considered one of the best Red Rangers of all time. And also, he replaced Jason, and that was always going to be very difficult. Even now, more than 20 years on, Jason is still one of the most popular Reds. So yeah, there were a few issues there. In terms of the whole Tommy becoming the leader thing, I didn't have a problem with it as such. I think in many ways it made sense because Billy wasn't really a leader at this point. And, obviously the idea of having a female leader was clearly not going to happen for whatever reason. Even now, it's only happened once in the show's entire run. The issue I had with it, to be honest, was the timing of it. It was just kind of, right, Tommy's back on the team, he's the White Ranger, so now he's the team leader. If I was Jason, I'd be kind of annoyed, to be honest. Like, for me, it would have made much more sense if when Jason handed over the Red Ranger powers to Rocky, at the same time, he would then hand over the leadership of the team to Tommy. And that is just simply how I would have played it. But for all of the criticism that I have given this season, there were some good points. Billy and Kimberly did both get some good development here. You saw Billy lose the techno-babble of season 1. You could see he's clearly more confident and a more accomplished fighter than he was before. He also doesn't wear his glasses all the time, which is just a little thing, but maybe that's a sign of the evolution of his character. And we also see that, Kimberly obviously clearly still loves shopping and, jokes about it a couple of times. She seems less, how can I put it, airheaded than before. She seemed to care a lot more about people. She's much like Billy, she's moving away from the more stereotypical nature of her character from season 1. So both of them do get some really good development in season 2. As much as Tommy did get most of the limelight, particularly early on, it was good to see that the other 2 remaining originals did get their chance to shine. So that is my thoughts on season 2. In all honesty, if I was to rank the 3 MMPR seasons, I would put season 2 as the weakest, kind of for the reasons that I have explained in this video. But there were still some good points to it. You know, Zedd, I think, was a fantastic villain, and you know, we had the good character development with Billy and Kimberly, and Bulk and Skull provided some great moments. Now that, you know, the bullying aspect of the characters have been dropped, and they were just the goofballs that we all know and love. So that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Next time I will be looking at MMPR Season 3. But until then, I'll catch you later.